to this crisis blind. And what we're going to be talking about today is actually the challenges and the hurdles that journalists who are doing this important work face. And IPI has been increasingly looking into this, assessing the challenges that journalists face around the world, covering climate and environment, which is a very risky and often dangerous beat for many journalists around the world. And I'm going to present in just a few minutes some of the findings that came out of a report that we published earlier this year with interviewing about 40 journalists around the world covering climate, just get a feel for how difficult this issue can be. But before I do so, I want to introduce our panelists today who are coming from around the world to speak about their experiences covering climate and the environment. And we also have one speaker joining us online. Buki, I hope you can hear us well.
Yes.
On Zoom. Yes. Hello.
Hi. Hello. Yes, I can hear everyone. Thank you.
Great. Just give me 1 second. So yeah, I'd like to introduce the panelists, starting with Buki Adebayo, who is coming to us, Thomson Reuters Foundation Context Newsroom. She's their West Africa correspondent, and she's a 2024 Rainforest Investigations Fellow at the Pulitzer Center. She's reported on climate change, health, gender, and environment and politics across several African countries for various media outlets, including CNN. And she's taught at the Harvard Division of Continuing Education and was a 2021 Nieman Fellow at Harvard University. So Bukola, thanks very much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yep. And closer afield, from here in Bosnia, we have Elena Basirovic, who is an investigative journalist focused on the energy transition and the environment. And she's the co-founder of Naratorium, which is a website focused on environmental reporting. She previously worked for Oslobođenje, which is one of the most important newspapers here in Bosnia, and the monthly magazine Dani. So Elena, thanks very much for joining us. In addition to that, we have Teresa Ribeiro, who is the OSCE representative on freedom of the media. Teresa, thank you very much for being here as well.
My pleasure.
To my left, we have Özgür Gürbüz, who's coming to us from Turkey. He's been reporting on environmental, economic, and energy issues since 1994. He's worked for several major newspapers and magazines in Turkey and is currently a columnist with Bir Gün newspaper. So Özgür, thanks very much to you as well for joining us. Yes, of course. And finally, we have Santiago Saez from covering Climate Now, CC Now. You previously were yourself a reporter on environmental issues in Spain, and now working for Covering Climate Now network. So thanks, Santiago, for joining us as well. So as mentioned, I'm actually going to break all of the rules that I told the moderators at the Congress. I'm going to give a short presentation with a slide. So can I ask you to please So I'll keep this short, but I want to give a little bit of, as I said, findings from a report that IPI published earlier this year, which was actually carried out by our previous executive director, Barbara Trianfi. And for this report, so it was Climate and Environmental Journalism Under Fire. It was the second report that we published about climate and environmental journalism. And this one specifically focuses on threats that climate and environmental journalists face. Okay. Shoot. Okay. The top sentence is cut off, but essentially it says that the report is the result of interviews with about 40 climate and environmental journalists in 21 countries across the world, so in the Americas, Europe, Africa, and Asia. And the report sort of laid bare the range of threats that climate and environmental journalists face. This includes the risk of physical attack. It includes the risk of arrest and detention, legal harassment, often in the forms of slaps or strategic lawsuits against public participation. We have online harassment, which is also a major issue, especially for journalists covering climate. Journalists also face restrictions on freedom of movement, so difficulties accessing areas where environmental destruction is taking place. For international journalists, difficulties reaching specific countries or getting visas for specific countries. And finally, challenges accessing publicly held information on climate and the environment. So I think it's, many of us in this room are familiar with the fact that many states adopt freedom of information laws and then don't implement them. So that's a major challenge for climate and environmental journalists who need data often to be able to do their jobs and explain the issues to the public. And the result of all of this that we found is that, and again, this isn't surprising, but it's that certain stories, which vary from region to region, effectively become off limits for journalists due to the dangers associated with covering them, and that ranges from illegal deforestation to different forms of mining that is environmentally harmful. And this obviously does a disservice to all of us who are trying to understand the environmental crisis and its impact. And the report also examines various strategies for countering these attacks and includes recommendations for states, for news outlets, for journalism support groups, and also for donor organizations that are supporting journalistic work. So the report also identified a number of risk factors for climate and environmental journalists. And one of the things that the report sort of states at the beginning is that, we found that the level of safety and freedom that environmental journalists enjoy or don't enjoy in general correlates with the overall level of press freedom in the country in question. So in countries where journalists in general face repression or retaliation for their work, environmental journalists also face that level of retaliation. And again, in a way that's not surprising because the issues that these journalists are covering are also issues that, other journalists, other watchdog journalists are looking into: corruption, abuse of power, this type of thing. And environmental journalists are also looking into those issues. But really what we found is that, journalists covering these issues, one of the risk factors, again, is that they're facing powerful vested interests. And this was sort of described in the report as a nexus, including companies that are profiting from environmental destruction, state officials who may often be corrupt and are also in some way profiting from this destruction, and in some cases organized crime, local organized crime, who may also be profiting from these activities taking place, and in many cases working in collusion with one another. So the bottom line is really that journalists on this beat are going up against some powerful interests who have a lot to lose from this type of investigative journalism taking place. So that is in a way the root in many cases of the danger that these journalists are facing. Another risk factor that we found is that environmental destruction is often takes place in remote locations, which are dangerous to access. So that in itself is already a risk, but also where the rule of law is weaker or in some cases non-existent. So if you think about journalists who are really out in the field in rural areas, covering, whatever it may be, tend to have less access to law enforcement. Law enforcement may not be reliable. They're more likely to be attacked. They're more likely to be attacked with impunity. They may also be running up against even local members of the local public who are not interested in coverage of industries that may also be in some ways a benefit to them. A third point is that many environmental reporters are local or freelance journalists who may lack the protection that larger news organizations can offer. So in many cases, they are really the ones shouldering the burden of telling environmental stories, which are often also local stories, and they don't, necessarily have safety protocols, risk assessment plans, or the ability of a large organization to get them out if they are in danger. Another point is that journalists covering environmental disasters and the climate crisis are often first responders. So if we think about some type of natural disaster that takes place, journalists are rushing to the scene, and they may be facing risks for which they are not trained or equipped. Another point, and we'll come to this later in the panel, but obviously the polarization around climate issues, which generates a huge amount of hostility towards climate journalists, and that manifests often in online harassment, online abuse, smear campaigns targeting journalists on these issues. And finally, and this is again in a way not surprising, but it's impunity for attacks against climate and environmental journalists. So when authorities don't hold those responsible for these attacks to account, it sends a message that this is in some way acceptable, that those who attack journalists, climate journalists, in order to silence them can get away with it, which in turn fuels further attacks. So this is just, a couple of recommendations. The report is quite long, and I'll provide a link to it after this, but just a couple of recommendations that emerged from this. So one is, obviously from the side of news organizations to really think about, developing and implementing risk assessments and safety protocols for journalists, for environmental journalists, and really understanding that this is a dangerous beat, that these journalists, this isn't about covering, it is very often about covering dangerous stories of corruption, for example, and this requires a serious approach to safety. And maybe I'll just jump to the third point, which is that, we also found that we need to create better networks and support structures, in particular, again, for freelancers or for local journalists, that they can rely on in an emergency. So those two are connected. We also, found that we really need to give more visibility to these attacks, also to deter potential aggressors, but really to speak about this issue more clearly and make a clear statement that the attacks on journalists, again, are not only attacks on climate journalists, are not only attacks on those specific journalists, but on everyone's right to information about the climate and environmental crisis. Obviously, the importance of ending impunity, the importance of ensuring the legal framework protects journalists, including so-called anti-SLAPP laws. And the report includes a couple of examples where these anti-SLAPP laws actually made a difference. Preventing vexatious lawsuits against climate journalists from coming to court. And sort of a corollary to that is ensuring that journalists on this beat have access to legal defense, they have access to pro bono legal representation, because again, journalists who are faced with the possibility of a life-ruining or career-ruining lawsuit, may think twice about publishing these really important stories. So that's just a couple of examples. And this is just a QR code link to the report, but it can be found on our website, Climate and Environmental Journalism Under Fire. So I just wanted to use that to set a little bit of the stage for our discussion today. But I want to get started now with the panelists. We're going to talk us through their experience. And I want to start with Buki from Nigeria. She's coming to us from very far away. So Buki, thanks again for being here. I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about your experience covering these issues. We talked a little bit, earlier this month about your specific experience, but if you could just share that and highlight some of the key challenges that you've been facing on this beat.
Yeah, thanks, Scott, for that. And I hope I'm audible. I was just thinking as you were sharing this report on some of the challenges I'm actually facing right now and the challenges I faced in the past. Just setting out as a young cub reporter in a local newsroom in Nigeria. It's like the most read, the most known publication in Nigeria. But at that time, and that was like, I think 9 years ago, climate reporting or reporting about the environment generally was just not a priority for that particular newsroom, despite their visibility, their reach, and all that. And when I stumbled on a story, it was about sand mining and sand dredging right there on the Atlantic in Lagos, and how this was impacting communities around the coastal area, whereby powerful companies, UAE-based companies, were mining sand right there in the coastal areas in Lagos. And a lot of the houses in that community were collapsing in water, meaning as they took more sand, more houses were becoming precarious and houses were falling into water. There was great pollution, like the ecosystem, the aquatic ecosystem in that area was just really, really polluted. And people living in the community were saying, they were mostly fishermen and women. And they were saying, we are not able to fish. We have to go further and further. The more they mine this this mine in this particular area, the more we have to go in, the more money, the more risk to our lives, to our community, to our water sources. It was a whole couple of climate problem and environmental problems for people living in that community. But the government wasn't, at the time, nobody was really looking into this. Nobody was really speaking to them. And I wanted to work on this story. It was going to take some time because now they had been served with eviction notice. They had been protesting. They had been talking about the impact of this on their community. And it was just getting more and more embarrassing for the government. And they really wanted to cover this up. And I wanted to work on this story. It was going to take 6 months, but it was going to take that length of time visiting. I mean, this community was on top of water. I would have to take like really, really good speedboats to be able to reach it. I needed the buy-in of my editors. I needed to have time to be able to work on this story. I was covering health at the time, and my editor would wonder, why do you want to cover what's the big deal about this story? And it was quite challenging because you had to do a lot of convincing. For them, it didn't look like this story was going to be on the cover of the newspaper or the home page. And even though I'd done a lot of investigations around health, around education, I wasn't getting the kind of traction I thought I was going to get. And the story had to be published for my editor to actually say, okay, you know what, I would convince my online manager for us to give the space that we need to publish and promote this story. It was really it was a first lesson and first opening for me. That was 9 years ago. And the interesting thing was that when that story was published, it was something that got so much attention. Even I was a local reporter, but international media organizations were reaching out to me. CNN reached out to me, BBC reached out to me, and they were asking me, oh, what are you seeing on the ground? We're seeing now that these communities are going to be evicted because they've been protesting and complaining about the pollution and also the impact on the infrastructure generally. And that was the first time that this community or coastal areas in Lagos, which are usually like slums, were getting that kind of attention. And more, I see that a lot of my colleagues, a lot of people that want to cover climate stories in Nigeria and probably the rest of part of the region that I cover in West Africa, it's usually having the support of your editors. And because there's no funding for this kind of investigation. They could fund you to travel to a particular community to go cover a story. But when it comes to environment and climate, it's quite you feel a little bit of isolation. You don't really have as much guidance as you would think you would have on other beats, and it can be quite lonely, so to say. But I would say things are shifting, attitudes are shifting. And one of the another, I mean, now I report for an international media, the Thomson Reuters Foundation, essentially Reuters. And we have sort of looked at environment as one of the pillars of reporting. And because of that, I did a recent story looking at pollution, oil pollution in Nigeria, in a community in Nigeria. Nigeria is one of the highest producers of oil and exporters of crude oil in Africa. And our revenue, the country's revenue is like 80% from oil. And because of the exploration of oil, we all know that that comes with also oil spills, pollution, and all that. And I followed the story of a community that for the past 30 years, a lot of oil infrastructure in that community has polluted their water, air pollution. They can't use their water. They've had a lot of fire incidents from just not being able to access this. There are pipelines running through their communities. They've been vulnerable to attacks. And when there's attacks by oil vendors who want to steal oil from that community, and the community has been saying, you know what, you need to compensate us for the land that is polluted. You need to compensate us for all the monies that we spend buying water to bathe, to drink, or even cook. In the last 30 years, it's been back and forth with the government, and they've not gotten any traction. And to go into this story, for the first time, I think I was really, really concerned about the sort of legal challenge that could come from this. But I was able to do this because I had the buy-in of my editors who were like, okay, you know what, dot your I's, dot your T's, and the support of the Pulitzer Center, of course, who funded some of the reporting, again, depending on external funding for reporting on a very crucial climate and environmental story that was impacting, like 2 million people lived in these communities I was looking into. But the difference now was I was a little bit more concerned about how the Nigerian government was going to react to reports of prolonged pollution in a particular area, and they've not been compensated. Nobody was talking to them. And they also told me, the people living in the community told me, anytime we complain about this problem, the next thing that happens is somebody comes from the agency to say, if you are complaining too much, we might as well evict you from this area. And going into that story, I was thinking, reporting it, is this something that's just going to cause more chaos, more problem for the community? Or is this a story that's lingered for 30 years that just needs to be told? And I was also concerned about the legal challenge and harassment that Reuters, for instance, or the foundation could face, because the government had said, you know what, these areas, we've addressed the pollution. They've always claimed to address the pollution, but the pollution was still ongoing, and we had to do laboratory tests to be able to quarterback our reporting. And that's also a lot of resources, because you have to pay for this. Again, you need the buying of editors, you need the support of organizations that are interested in climate reporting, that will provide sort of like legal guidance, or just support, knowing that if anything goes, if this report is published, it's going to eat some very strong interest, in this case, the government. Will I have the support of my editors, the support of my organization, and just all that going in your head while still trying to do what you really think is right in that situation. So really, that's really been my own experience reporting out of Nigeria. I've done a lot of reporting also on pollution, environmental issues out of Ghana. And every time you have to, is always concerns about the legal challenge from the government, or just wondering about your safety generally when the stories are published, and it gets the visibility that it deserves, really. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Buki. So I think it's fair to say that in your case, you don't see the authorities as an ally or a source of protection for your safety, or for the safety of other reporters working on this field.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you don't, because whatever you're looking into is probably because an agency or a government, in the case of the sand mining, it was the government that was given this big UAE companies license to do these operations. Of course, looking into it, you are trying to look into something that they obviously don't want you to talk about. Somebody has not done what they should do because they are profiting from this. It was the same thing with the oil pollution. The government was profiting. The government profits from oil. 80% of what is used to run hospitals, education, and all that infrastructure in Nigeria is from oil. The more you report about pollution, the climate ramification of this fossil fuel and oil infrastructure, the more it makes them look bad, right? So they really don't want you to look into that, and you're concerned. Of course, that's not the main thing that you're looking at. You want to report this, but at the end of the day, you also need to look at your own safety. You need to look at your own, you being able to do your job, and also being able to do it well. And yeah, those are some of the concerns I have. The government is definitely not your ally. They are not supplying you information. I know I had to stay on a particular report for more than a year because I was just reaching out, and they just kept deflecting on responses, and just saying, okay, you know what, we've closed this chapter. We don't want anyone to talk. Like, I had sources tell me from the government saying, anytime you send us emails asking about this, things get uncomfortable for us. And if I get that feedback, of course, I'm not comfortable with that. I'm wondering, is there something else going on in the background? And that's just really my experience
Thanks.
reporting on environmental issues in the West Africa region generally. Yeah.
Thanks, Book. And I think, that point again sort of just underscores this idea that environmental and climate journalists are poking at issues where there are a lot of vested interests at stake. And I think that some of those examples really, really illustrate that. It was good. I'd like to turn to you and talk a little bit about Turkey, a country that has huge press freedom challenges, where censorship is a major issue in many different ways, where safety is an issue, legal harassment is an issue, access to information is an issue. So, can you talk a little bit about, from your side, how these issues affect your ability and the ability of other journalists to cover climate, the energy transition, the environment? And I think you'll also tell us a little bit about a new climate law and how that will impact your work as well. Thank you.
Well, I think like we have too many problems like many of you faces in your countries, like the lack of resources, the independent journalism, especially if you're working for an independent newspaper, like I write to Birgun. So you do have not enough resources to go every places, and especially environmental journalism requires you to be there actually, because you want to be with the community who oppose to some business projects or something. But there is also the good side of it. Maybe I try to be optimistic this time. With the technology, then you can connect, like talk to some people. So that helps. But still, of course, like you wish to go there and then witness what's happening in the ground. So that doesn't happen. But I think these are the common problems in the world, like everybody is facing. What is special about Turkey? The media is just so divided in Turkey. So I would roughly call that there are some statistics as well, like 90% of the media is controlled by the government in Turkey. So what it means, I mean, okay, controlled by the government means it's not just like, oh, if you have a story, the government company or institution is just doing and something doing wrong, and then you want to make a news, then you probably have problem with the government. No, it doesn't mean that. It means more than that. Because we also have corporations, some companies are very close to the government. So it's just so funny, like, there is a big power source. Either some of the company owners, they do own media sources, like I used to work, many of them. So they own the media. Basically, if you're a journalist working in one of the big media companies in Turkey, newspapers or TV stations, probably you wouldn't be able to even mention the news that you want to make. The second thing is they also have, I mean, they're also connected. They have a good network. I think the government sits somewhere in the center. So they can even block you without like owning the media that you're working. So you have like many cases that like, if you're just like trying to take a company close to the government, or maybe a friend of your media organization boss, then they will stop you, they will censor you. I have some stories, like maybe I should tell one that's funny. I used to work for a newspaper, and then it was about to be sold to another guy, but while I was working, it was under the government control. Then I was sent to investigate a new coal power plant in the region. So I spent, I think, 3 days, talked to the villagers, had a good story because people were just against the coal power plant. I came back to Istanbul, and then I wanted to make the news. And then my editor-in-chief then asked me, oh, do you know which company is going to take the new coal power plant? I said, well, it's not yet known, but there will be a probably tender and etc. But he heard that the possible buyer of our media corporation will be the company. That's the possibility I'm talking about. Then he blocked the news. He censored, he didn't print it, just because of the possibility in the future, the owner could be the owner of this power plant. So these are the like censorship you face in Turkey. Then it forces you to do like self-censorship. Of course, that's another, I think, major issue. Then we have also some legal cases coming through. You could be now, I mean, not yet, but there's already like enough court cases on environmental journalism. Like my friends, like especially ones like reporters working in the ground, police brutality, plus court cases. social media attacks, because there was the huge social media army. We call it troll, like maybe Tolkien heroes. Anyway, but like they attack you, if you really annoy the government or some companies. But on top of that, now there are two legal new things that's coming in Turkey. One of them is, let me see, because I don't want to forget, or I don't want to say it. Yeah, misleading information law. There is already in practice. So it's just like continuing. And then there is a government social media account as well. It blames you of the points at you that you're misleading. If they don't like your news, you're likely to be misleading anyway. Then the new one, which is not yet enforced, but it's in the penal code, amendment to penal code, foreign influence agent amendment. So I think some of you are already familiar about this foreign agent thing. That's, I don't know, if you don't press hard, if you don't oppose hard, it will come to Turkish life as well in Turkey. Then, I quote from Journalists Without Borders. They say, research going against the security of the state or its internal or external political interest that can make you a foreign agent, basically, in Turkey. And the penalty of it starts from 3 years to 7 years in prison. So that's the one thing. The funniest thing, I kept it as the last one, the climate law. You will think that the climate law shouldn't harm journalists, but it's so funny. That's also draft climate law, I should say. And one of the academician, Serkan Köybaşı, I quote from him, just look at the climate law. He's a professor at Bahçeşehir University. And he found one article, is Article 3, paragraph 5. It says, the new law will oblige everyone in Turkey to support all actions to be taken in relation to climate change. Basically, it says that, if the government declares something that is in favor of climate, then you have to support it. So his interpretation is that if, for example, in Turkey, like government is doing, nuclear energy is climate friendly, then I won't be able to oppose the nuclear energy. I don't know the punishment of it, because it's not in the penal code, of course, but this against another law. I daily actually oppose the nuclear energy, so probably I'll be daily taken to the court or something will happen to, not me, but any of us. So these are the new issues. They're so clever to do that, in the climate law. By the way, the climate law is basically, well, most of it, nothing. Just the carbon emission trading section is serious. But the rest is just full of rubbish. But this article just put it somewhere. So basically, with probably any company ask government, because as I said, they have this kind of relationship. Oh, please put this efforts, as a climate friendly action, then you won't be able to really criticize or report on that. And this is, of course, first of all, journalists concerned, but the foreign agent law also, I think, concerns just the ordinary people using social media as well. I'll stop here.
Sure. Thank you, Özgür. I think a lot of very worrying developments in Turkey, but I think also what you described at the beginning, this sort of media capture, reflects a wider issue again in Turkey about the ways in which the media has come under the control of pro-government media owners, of the AKP party. And we see that doesn't just harm public interest information generally, it also harms climate and information on climate and the environment. So something we also mentioned in the IPI report. So thanks very much for sharing those thoughts. I want to turn now to Alena. I think we'd love to hear from you about what it's like to be an environmental reporter here in Bosnia. What are the issues that you face? And are they similar, different to what we've heard so far? We talked also earlier this month about what it's like, in particular, to be a female environmental reporter. You've got a number of threats, you and your team. So it'd be great if you could share that experience with us. Thank you.
Sorry for my voice. It was broken from yesterday. So if I stop, just excuse me. Yeah. Is it better? Okay. So yes, when you say I'm environmental journalist, I actually also mean that I cover crime and corruption in environment, which is like a specific thing. And actually, this is what got us in trouble. So basically, we founded an auditorium, me and 6 other colleagues, 4 years ago, and one of them and I, a male colleague, and me, we were both from Breza, which is like small city near the Sarajevo, but it depends on coal mine. So we were thinking about energy transition and what would it bring to this small city, which lives only out of the coal. So this was our starting point for the series of reporting articles on energy transition. So we started doing that, and pretty clear. It was pretty like early clear what are the main issues there, but also we had some surprising things that we discovered. Like for example, we discovered that there are no female in the energy. Energy is a male sector. That is the power. There is the electricity. So there is money and power, and all the sector belongs to a man. It didn't take long to understand it, and also you can see it by the access they have, like by the behavior that they had, like to me, like when you just compare it to the things that my male colleague, he was not experiencing the same things from the same people as me. That was pretty clear, like from the start. We finished this series of the reports, but unfortunately all the material that was recorded was stolen. So we only published stories, which is good enough, but we had a plan to make a documentary out of it. Still, the stories are great. And that is a long read, and we are covering all angles. Like we want to have like all city. We want to have like normal people, what they think about energy transition. Do they know anything about transition plans? So yeah, that's finished in maybe 2 years. We have been traveling from all over the Bosnia. Then after we published, nothing happened, and in some cases we were really lucky and happy that nobody wrote that, like read that report, because we were saying a lot in there, but it was not like, because it's a long read and nobody wants to see a long read. But we had, of course, really good feedbacks also from the academy, from the people that we knew, and like organizations. After that, we started a cross-border project on wood in Bosnia with 3 colleagues, 2 from Holland and 1 from France. And that was really interesting. So we also we had a lot of cities that we wanted that we pinned. It could have like crime and corruption in there. And we had some leads and we had some sources. One of those cities is Šipovo, which is in Republika Srpska, the entity of Bosnia and Herzegovina, mainly Serb. Like mainly Serb and ethnic. So we have been there. So basically by the research we discovered that the mayor it has 4 sawmills. And in 2020, when the price of the wood was like 10 times higher than usual, only him got all the tenders and cutted all the wood, which was also paid but by 12 other sawmill companies. But nobody could cut, only him. So he exported it, and I think we had some kind of a price which he get for that wood, but I cannot remember now. It doesn't even matter. So we published it. Among other stories, there was a few stories in that. Then he called my colleague. Of course, when we were investigating, we were trying to call him and ask him for his response on it. That is something that we always do, of course. He never answered. But then when the story was up, he called and he told to my colleague, please record this. He was luckily at his home. He put the recorder on, and the mayor, which is the wealthiest mayor in Bosnia and Herzegovina, telling him really nasty and awful things that I really do not want to say here. It's really rude and it's not an appropriate thing to do. It is so he calls me and says, okay, I have recorded this and the mayor asked me to publish it. What do we do? And I said, we have to publish. This is the only thing that can protect us. And that actually publishing the video was the only protection that we have.
So it worked. Publishing it helped,
yes,
you think?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that was the only thing that helped because nothing happened. This man, he assaulted some lately, maybe months ago, another colleague from Capital, from Banja Luka, and he has no consequences.
I think that's something that we discussed earlier about the fact that, because I was asking before whether the authorities provide any assistance to you when you are attacked, and I think the answer was a clear no.
No, nothing happened.
Yeah, which is again, I think, a really obviously disturbing situation, and it relates to this larger issue of impunity that journalists who are investigating. And I think what you said actually at the very beginning is so important. When I said that you're an environmental reporter, and you said I'm an environmental reporter who covers crime and corruption, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about environmental reporters or climate journalists in many cases who are covering high level, or can also be local, corruption, but dangerous stories. And so I think that was a really important point. And we see that authorities are often somehow linked to these cases or are not interested or whatever.
In my experience, until what I have from now, in almost every story, the authorities are the part of the crime. And every story that I have written, the authority is the one who does it.
That says it all, or it says a lot.
Yes.
And I think that's a finding that I don't think is unique probably to Bosnia. I think we see that in other parts of the world, that the authorities are involved in these environmental crimes and have no interest in, obviously, then supporting the journalists uncovering them. Alina, thank you very much for sharing that. I want to jump now to Santiago, and you're going to talk to us about a slightly different issue, one that we face a lot, I think, in Europe and in North America in particular, but in other countries, online harassment is also an issue in Turkey. But journalists covering the climate become the target, really, of these sort of online harassment campaigns, online attacks and abuse. So talk to us about this phenomenon, what you see and what can be done about it.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I would like to mention that although I'm in awe of the journalists that I'm sitting here with and that I'm seeing these days here, I would also like to uplift the experience of many journalists who are um, just at a job, who are not award-winning, who are not going to make into the history books, but their job is so important, and it's so important in climate coverage as well. And this is stuff for them as well. So it's not just covering dangerous stories or hard-hitting corruption stories, it's doing your everyday story. Now I would like to read to you. I'm not as discreet as my colleague here, and I'm going to read to you an email that we received last month. I'm really sorry for the language is a bit strong, but I hope you enjoy the nuances. The subject line is lying propagandists in jeopardy due to climate change alarmist agenda. Fuck every single one of you greeny sons and daughters of bitches for your blatant falsehoods, the unrelenting and ludicrous propaganda. It is my sincere prayer that the earth will open wide and swallow you all into a gigantic river of magma. Perhaps when the world is rid of you, elitist little communists, the entire earth will then thrive once more. You scavenging maggots, have a wonderful April in the Northern Hemisphere. The guy's a poet, obviously, and this is kind of funny because he uses like kind of this stuff, but this is really not a funny story. And I was thinking when I was preparing for this panel, I was thinking to talk about Don Phillips and other colleagues who have paid very, very strong prices. But then I thought about another guy who maybe you know it. He made the news last year. Chris Cloninger. He was a meteorologist at KCCI, which is a CBS affiliate in Des Moines, in Iowa, in the United States. And the guy is just doing the weather. Well, he just introduced climate change concept into the weather report, as we recommend lots of journalists all the time to do. Well, he got death threats, very serious death threats that actually pushed him out of his job and out of the state. He had to go back to Massachusetts, where he was originally from. He's not in communication anymore. He's now, I think, a scientific advisor for a company. These kind of journalists, who is like just some anonymous guy doing weather report in Des Moines, is, from my point of view, very, very important as well. In the report that we saw at the beginning, it says that 4 out of 10 climate journalists report having received harassment online. This data is actually consistent with what we see from our partners. What they report was we have more than 500 partners from all over the world, big ones, The Guardian, Al Jazeera, AFP, and really tiny ones like hyper-local media in Slovakia or Nepal. But this is something that we see across the board. People reporting this and people demanding resources and training in how to face this backlash. And I'm not saying only the kind of backlash that my colleagues here are facing because of the kind of stories they're reporting. I'm just talking generic day after day after day after day harassment of the kind that I was reading in this email, which, yeah, maybe hopefully, you're not gonna have your life threatened or your livelihood threatened, but this is also important and drives journalists out of the work. And thus the climate story is left untold. I don't know what the current meteorologist at KCCI is talking, is saying in his reports every day, but I'm guessing what he's not saying. And this is something that kind of like we have accepted as a profession. We have said, yeah, it comes with the job. You have to live with this. And it is true, it comes with the job. Because our job is now in social media. That's our workspace now, our office is social media. And these kind of attitudes and stuff happens there. So to a point, it does come with the job. But I really hate that expression because it kind of makes me feel like it's normalized, like we should accept it. It comes with the job, yeah, deal with it. but no, I disagree with that. And I have some more data and stuff. I don't know if you want me to go over that now, or yeah, sure. So we don't know often who are the individuals who are behind these harassment campaigns and their actual message. And sometimes they do. Like this email that I read to you, I didn't read the sender, but he signed. And I said he purposely, is mostly males and is mostly conservative. They are in this we have a profile of who's the online harasser. This harassment includes personal attacks. Usually it's a mix of personal attacks, climate disinformation, character assassination, and veiled threat. Usually it's not direct threat. Sometimes it is, but often it's like veiled threats. I wish you would disappear from the face of the earth and so on. Sometimes it is more serious. Sometimes it crosses into real life, into the offline world. We know it's climate deniers because they often include climate denying propaganda in their messages, and this lets us pinpoint it quite a bit. This, first of all, is something very important, is that this is a very small minority of people. Even in the most conservative places that we work with, even in, I don't know, like West Virginia, like we work a lot with the United States. So even in West Virginia or in Dallas, Fort Worth County and so on, there's very little people that engage in this attitude. 15% of Americans at the moment deny climate change, or 19%, depending on, we have two studies, but around that range. That's the total of people who deny climate change. Not all of them engage in harassment. They are politically polarized, often, but not exclusively, on the right side of the spectrum. This is backed by several studies. You have one from 2021 from Oxford and Leibniz universities. I have another one from last year from Yale University, and there's many more. I mean, you can easily find them in Google, but if you have curiosity, feel free to reach out to me and I'll send you those reports. And we know that these harassers are often stoked by cultural warfare rhetoric that is deliberately distributed by certain politicians, think tanks, lobbies, media outlets, influencers, etc., etc., etc. You know more or less in your region and in your country who I'm talking about. They are different in each places. So yeah, this is the kind of people that we're seeing. And I also have some good practices that we recommend journalists from all over the world and from all sorts of journalists, people who are heroes and people who are doing their job. And I think there's a few things that people can do. Yeah.
You share briefly?
Yeah. First of all, and I'm going to just talk to an imaginary person. Be prepared, because if you cover climate with any degree of seriousness, it's very likely that at some point somebody will reach out to you with some nasty words. Be prepared. But don't be scared. Most of the time, it's nothing. Most of the time, it's just an annoyance. But this annoyance can become really upsetting sometimes and really distressing. So you please take care of your mental health. When these things happen, first document everything. Save all the emails, all the interactions in social media, save all the links, save screenshots, and save them online and offline. This is important, apart from all the security measures, digital security measures I'm not going to discuss here right now, but you should have. These should be stored because it could be useful in the future to document this in front of court in some cases, but also in front of your workplace. Second, remember, facts are on your side. You like not only facts, people. This is a small minority of people. They are very loud. They are nasty. They are aggressive, but they are few. Most people is on your side, even if it can feel very isolating and very overwhelming at some point. Third, you don't have to engage. Actually, don't engage. That's the best practice. First, because most of these people are not interested in facts. They're not interested in arguing or understanding. And second, because you're just gonna feed their algorithm. So you're gonna give them a lot of visibility. So we recommend to mute in social media if they're in social media, or send them to spam if they're in your email. You can also block them if you prefer. We don't recommend usually that you block them, because then you give them a bit more fodder for their campaigns. But if you feel more comfortable blocking them, that's fair enough.
One more, and then we can come back.
Sure. Yeah. And then talk to your manager and talk to your newsroom if you can trust them. I'll tell you later if you're a freelancer or if you cannot trust. There's other stuff that you can do, but talk to them often, especially in large media houses. There are resources that you may not be aware of that they can give you if you're in this situation.
Thank you very much. These are really helpful and useful tips, and I'm sure that you'll be able to share those with others. Santiago, thanks a lot. So I want to come last but not least to Teresa Rivero, the OSCE representative on freedom of the media. Teresa, we've heard a lot here today about the threats and attacks that journalists covering this beat face, ranging from physical attacks to legal harassment to online harassment. And this is an interesting time because you and the other special rapporteurs on freedom of expression just published the joint declaration on the climate crisis and freedom of expression. So this is an important document. I was wondering if you could tell us, what is this declaration, and what are states' responsibilities to protect environmental journalists, firstly, and secondly, how will this joint declaration make a difference?
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me in this very interesting discussion. First of all, I would like to say that the RFOM, the representative on freedom of the media, is an institution, an independent institution in a security organization, which is OSCE. I think it's important because one of the dimensions of the comprehensive security concept that is encompassing all the activities of the OSCE is precisely environment, and the other is also the human dimension, where media freedom is included. So I would say that the joint declaration this year allowed us to really combine these two dimensions that are key for security, and that are key to really approach the major global crisis we are facing right now, which is climate. Definitely, I would say that we have this big crisis, and we need to approach it, thank you very much also to my fellow panelists, because it was very interesting, all the dimensions you brought to this discussion. I also wanted to, underline the problem of security, because we know that climate change triggers lots of challenges regarding security, displaced people, forced migration. There's so many things, pollution. So it's really big. And Santiago, I would like very much, because I think that if we want really to deal with this crisis, we need mobilization and scrutiny. And in both cases, journalists are really key, because raising awareness, it's no one as journalists can do it possibly in the most together with other stakeholders, science and governments in good faith, to really, mobilize people, to raise awareness, and to show how this climate crisis requires the efforts of all of us. And the second, I would say, it's scrutiny. And again, journalists are there to really ensure that scrutiny is taking place, and it's really contributing to solve this climate change crisis. Because of all these reasons, we decided this year, and also to align with the topic of this year World Press Freedom Day, which was about climate change and journalism and climate change. It was important that the 4 free speech mandate holders of the global system, which means it's UN representative on freedom of opinion, OSCE representative on freedom of the media, OAS organizations, special rapporteur of OAS, Organization of the American States, and also special rapporteur from African Union, that they look at climate change and freedom of expression. Every year, you know, these 4 institutions, they choose a topic to, in a way, to set the scene and to set the agenda of an important topic with relevant implications on freedom of expression. And this year was climate and journalism, of course, and freedom of expression. And you were asking, what are the states supposed to do? Of course, I would say that they have 3 main responsibilities according to this joint declaration. The first one is protection. Protection of journalists is key. If we really want to have good reporting on climate, we need to ensure that they have the right protection to do so. And we know that in many cases, and it was very much described by my colleagues here today, that in many cases, all the business linked to climate change are concentrated in powerful companies in remote areas where scrutiny is difficult. So of course, and they are very, very, very powerful. So journalists need to be protected, and this is clear mentioned and referred and developed in this joint declaration. The second one is access to information. So states should adopt all the measures that really make access to information, which is crucial for the work of journalists, really a reality, and allow them to carry out their mission. And the third one is a kind of a proactive promotion of independent journalists and independent reporting to create this kind of independent atmosphere for the journalists to be able to report on the issues of climate change in the best way. So, and we have heard that in many cases we witness media capture, we witness coordinated attacks against journalists, and you both spoke about this in your case with the gender-based dimension, which means that it's even worse. We also heard that there are quite a lot of this kind of abusive lawsuits against journalists that are investigating crimes against environment. So we need to create this enabling environment for journalists, which means really to take all the measures to combat these coordinated attacks against journalists that are reporting on climate change. We need clear protection and to allow them to report without fearing having lawsuits that can completely destroy their career and their sources and the outlet, the media survival. So these are some of the measures that the states, according to this joint declaration, should adopt to really allow journalists to do their work of mobilization and scrutiny. Why are these joint declarations important? Because they, first of all, they are adopted by all the free speech mandate holders, and this is important, which means that they can set the agenda. At the same time, and this is an important reason also to look at this JDs as a contribution to the work of journalists is, of course, to set progressive standards in the field of freedom of expression. So it's advancing freedom of expression standards, and at the same time putting high in the political agenda topics this year like climate change. So this is the role of this JDs, and of course then it's when looking at a specific topic, identifying what are the challenges and what the different stakeholders, from states to online platforms to journalists themselves and other stakeholders like media outlets should adopt to really ensure that the important work or the important mobilization that is needed to tackle a crisis of like climate change can be materialized. So I would say that we have this multiple dimensional function of the joint declarations.
Thank you very much, Teresa, for sharing that. We're running low on time here, so we may not be able to field questions from the audience today. But I just want to close out maybe by coming back to our first three speakers, to Buki, to Özgür, and to Alena, just to ask you very brief last comment, if you can try to summarize. What would be sort of one key change, one thing that would need to happen to improve your ability to cover these topics, to cover climate and environment safely and freely? What would be at the top of your list? Buki, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, and thank you for those great insights. All the panelists have spoken. I think for me, and not just speaking for myself, also speaking for other climate journalists that we've met in different forums, is just to also sort of front and center climate reporting and environmental reporting in our daily coverage, and I mean in the newsroom. Again, and I always harp on this. I find out that whatever happens, if you have the support of your editors, also in shaping your story in a way that is interesting to everyone and it matters. I mean, I think the climate, not just crisis, we've seen a lot of reporting around heat waves in schools. Schools have had to shut down. There are gig workers, there are remote workers. There are a lot of workers that have been affected by this. It's a present concern, because when we talk about environment, climate, sometimes it could be like, oh, it's the big stories around corruption. It just could be the day-to-day stories that affect you and I, wherever we are or whatever region that we are. And I'm just saying, I think what will make my work easier and the work of my other colleagues covering climate, especially in Africa or the rest of it, is just for editors to sort of give more visibility to stories around climate. And that way it signals to stakeholders, industries, communities, sectors, and even the government, whoever, that this is a story that deserves that. These are stories that deserve attention and need to be looked into. And everyone, that's how you get everyone sort of aware and more committed to this sort of issues around climate and the environment. So for me, I would say more newsrooms need to dedicate more resources, support, and just encourage reporters and correspondents who increasingly want to cover this kind of stories.
Thank you, Buki. Özgür, what would be at the top of your list?
I mean, freedom of speech, I would say it will be the easy one, but maybe we need conceptual changes all around the world. I think I really struggle when people comes to us, oh, don't you want Turkey to grow? You know, the economic growth, for example. But the economic growth, what they meant is just based on GDP. GDP is like kind of a lying machine. I mean, just a simple example, if I have a legal gun bought from the shop, paid all the VAT and everything and killed somebody here, then I will increase the GDP. So this is the figure, but we are all like talking about this based on this figure. So I think we need a global change of like, you know, how we describe the economy, how we are going to use the figures, what are the bases of our, you know, the growth or development. I think we need to change that globally, because we cannot do it in one country. And that's the one thing. And that's the third thing, I think, is about us, the environmental journalists. I mean, every journalist, to be honest, like look like each other, but we are a bit different because sometimes, or most of the time, we are the voice of animals, plants, basically who don't speak the language of human. You know, the threats we're facing, if the grass was able to speak, you know, in human language, then the company, you know, the grass says, oh, don't, you know, to destroy me, the company maybe will go on grass and jump on it, you know, the harassment will be on grass. But like the journalists, environmental journalists have to be the voice of the grass. So that's why we are just like much more on a target, I feel that. I mean, that doesn't, you know, happen in every sort of journalism. So maybe this is also like have to be understood very well, that we are corresponding, you know, we are just like acting behalf of the environment. So, but we really need, just one more thing, we really need like global changes, because in Turkey, like we have problems about like getting the information data, especially like coal power plant data is just trade secret. I think under the either Paris Agreement or international negotiations, there could be also, you know, change, and every country just like, you know, the openly let journalists or environmentalists to get this data from the coal power plant. That could be internationally binding, you know, kind of regulations as well. Thank you.
Good, and I'm going to give the last word to you, Elena. What would be on the top of your list?
I can get
Okay,
it.
sure.
But okay, I will try. I think it's a law enforcement. Like we need to start implementing those good laws that we have on freedom of expression. Here in Bosnia, we still have it. in Republika Srpska, this is not like, this is also threatened. But the laws that we have to use it, and we have to implement it. And I think the juristic system, this is what we need to have better, to feel safer or to feel more secure doing my job.
Thank you. I think it's an important message to end on. Santiago, I'll give you a very last word, very brief.
Very, very last. If for anyone who's interested in climate reporting, we are meeting tonight for after the last session at from 8:30 so on until late at a place called Pivnica. I think I'm pronouncing it wrong. Yeah, Pivnica Sarajevo, which is a 10-minute walk from here. You should have it in one of the newsletters that these guys sent.
Yes, yes, please, Teresa. Yes.
Very much, a call like Santiago, because I would I recommend, this JD, the Joint Declaration. It's important to read it. Some time ago, we commissioned a study on the JDs that we produced for more than since more than 25 years. And the conclusion was that JDs constitute the most significant of non-binding standards on freedom of expression at the global level. So it's worth to look at. Many of the issues that were raised here are there, and it's also used in many in case submissions by Article 19 by Open Society Justice Initiative, Media Legal Defense Initiative, in East African Court of Justice, in the European Court of Human Rights. So really, JDs are important, and again, they set the standards of freedom of expression and certain topics, and important ones every year. So I think it's important to look at them, to use them. It's an important instrument of soft power.
And absolutely underscore that. It's true. We use them in our work. They're a really important tool. So I think, and this year's declaration is especially important. I just want to underscore what Santiago said about the gathering this evening. If you're interested in covering climate and the environment, please do join this gathering this evening. If you have questions about where it's being held, please check with Santiago. We'd love to see you there. And lastly, I just want to thank all of you for being part of this panel. Buki, thank you for joining us from far away. Özgür, Elena, Santiago, Teresa, thank you so much for being here.